bit to cover. So we're going to make a start shortly. And as you've probably just been notified, we're going to record the session. So if you can't stay and you do have to leave, then you'll be able to catch up. It would be nice if you could let us know if you do go. There are a few breakout sessions in this particular event, and we'd like people to be in threes in those breakout rooms. So if you're not here, then please let us know, and we won't be allocated. So I'm just going to just do a few brief introductions at the beginning, and then hand over to Benna for our talk this evening. Just to notify you, I guess, of a few events that are coming up. So they're on the Mindfulness Wales website. We've introduced a new event, I guess, from next week. After this talk today from Benna, we're going to have an inquiry event. So it's the same time, a week today. And we're inviting everybody that's come along or is registered to watch the video if they're not here, or if they are here, to come along and actually have a discussion around what we've heard. And we're hoping to kind of get some engagement around Mindfulness Wales, but also around some of the things that we are hearing today and in future events as well. So it's something we're hoping to take forward. And Ben is, I guess, our test subject then, really, in terms of this. So we'll see how it goes. But we're hoping to do a couple of these with future events. So we've got another event coming up in May, May the 18th. Chris Tamjidi talking about mindfulness transformation of culture. And also then in September, so currently we've got scheduled Rebecca Crane talking about our mindfulness-based programs up to the job. So that's a few of the events that are up and coming. There'll be some more added. We've got some lined up already. We're just waiting for confirmation before we add them to the website. So please keep an eye out on that or on social media. So that's the end of my little intro. So I'm going to hand over to Benna in a second. And as you know, compassion, the challenges and why it matters for a more compassionate Wales is the event title. So over to you, Benna, and I'll let you do some introductions for yourself, if that's okay.
Jill, thank you, Rob. That's lovely. I'm just going to share my screen. Let's just get that up. Hold on. Beginning. There we are. Can you see that, Rob? Is that all nice and clear?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you this evening. It's been tricky to decide what to include, so I really hope that what I've ended up putting in feels useful. It's such a big conversation, the conversation around compassion. So yeah, I hope there is stuff in here that is useful for you. So I'm going to do a bit of introducing of me and who I am and why I'm here talking to you. I'm hoping I'll give you an understanding of both compassion and compassion practices. I'm going to talk quite a bit about those. I'm going to touch on the evidence base underpinning compassion and why it matters. There'll be a chance to do work, in fact, in threes, we've decided, and to contribute if you want to. So if you don't feel you want to be in the breakouts, as we approach one, it might be that you leave the meeting for the duration of the breakout and come back, just so that if you're put into a small breakout in a three, that your partners are not left without somebody. It's absolutely fine once you're in your breakout to negotiate your participation in that. So if you just want to be a listener, that's absolutely fine. And questions are really welcome. If you put those in the chat, that's fine. I'm hoping there'll be space for those at the end. If there's anything burning, Rob, keep an eye and let me know as we go through. So why am I here talking to you? Compassion has been a really big deal for me. I mean, as a psychologist, probably all my life and from the beginning of my career. But in terms of it feeling as if it mattered in work and kind of spread across lots of the things I was doing, I would say 2013 was the beginning of that. And that was following the publication of the Francis report, which was the inquiry into the mid-Staffordshire catastrophic failure in care. And in the aftermath of that, there was a lot of talk about how we could make people be more compassionate, how we could stop these failures in compassion happening again. Lots of focus on individuals. So, are there personality traits? Can we train compassion? And myself and a number of colleagues working with me in Aneurin Bevan at that time felt that there was something of a neglect of the system conditions that might inhibit or enable compassion. And we were really interested in how we might pay more attention to. So out of that, we developed a leadership course in Aneurin Bevan to grow compassionate leadership, and that's just entering its 7th cohort. We started last month, which is lovely, and lovely to be back in the room with people, having run the previous cohort online. And from that course, myself and my colleague Adrian Neal had done some work with the National Academy for Educational Leadership, which led to the publication of a report called More Than a Sticking Plaster, which was really about head teacher wellbeing, the retention of head teachers, and making sure that what we were talking about attended to the system conditions and not just the kind of mopping up function of wellbeing. We've also done a lot of work around Schwartz rounds, and I won't say more about that, there's just not time, but I've got a website for that later on in my slides if you're interested, and taking caregiving care rounds, which I am going to touch on in Aneurin Bevan. So out of a lot of that work came the compassion practices. So I am a co-founder of the Compassion Practices Collective, and I'll show you the website and talk you through some of the practices that you can access on there later in the talk. Another reason another kind of connection with compassion that has woven its way through my working life in the last 4 or 5 years or so is with compassionate mental health. And I've actually a couple of times met Vishvapani there. He has done some work on mindfulness. So that's a subject close to my heart, making sure that mental health services can be as compassionate as they possibly can be, and how we support staff to enable them to provide compassionate care. I'm currently doing some work with Social Care Wales, which I'm really excited about, on compassion practices. So we're training up some leaders in Social Care Wales to be able to offer these practices. And I have a day a week secondment in Improvement Cymru, and have co-led some national work on psychology for improvement. And I think there are real opportunities to think about compassion in that setting. So there's a whole load of kind of strands, in a way, that this umbrella heading of compassion pulls together. So what is compassion? Paul Gilbert, who's huge in this area, he defines it as a sensitivity to suffering in self and others, with a commitment to try to alleviate and prevent it. An important distinction between empathy and compassion. So empathy is our connection with, our feeling of others' pain. Compassion always has this action component to it, this commitment to try and alleviate and prevent. And actually it's for that reason, so people often talk about compassion fatigue, but there is a theory that in fact what we talk about is empathy fatigue. So empathy tends to activate our pain centers in our brain. Compassion can activate our pleasure centers, because actually there's something satisfying about making a difference and helping somebody. So sometimes we wonder if compassion fatigue is in fact more accurately labeled as empathy fatigue. So I want to talk to you about a flow of compassion. So we often think of compassion as the compassion we give to others, so self to others. But there is, and in services, and when we talk about compassionate care, that's absolutely what we're talking about. But there's also the compassion that we may or may not show to ourselves, so self to self. And there's also other to self, so the compassion that we might receive from others. And I was thinking about this flow, so I've talked about this flow a lot, but just recently it occurred to me that it was a bit like a river. So I found this image for you. This is, if we had a bit more time, I'd do a quiz. Anyone know what this is an aerial view of? I'm going to tell you. It's Lyon in France, the second biggest city in France. The motorway, if you drive through the middle of Lyon, comes down this river on the right hand side and crosses the bridge there. So you get an amazing view of the river. So on the right hand side you have the Rhone, and on the left you have the Saône, and they both join to form a much bigger Rhone that then heads south and joins the Mediterranean eventually. And I've always been fascinated by this particular confluence because of the very different colours of the river. So the Saône has this kind of darker, muddier tone. And finally, they kind of merge and mix and form this kind of bigger, stronger river that is all one colour. But it was occurring to me that when we think about the flow of compassion, there is something about the compassion that we give to others. So if we imagine the Rhone further down river, that's the kind of flow, that's the thing that we want to support and sustain. But I guess I would see these two kind of streams coming into the river as being the things that we need to maintain that flow. So if we take the Saône as self-compassion and the upper Rhone as compassion we have from others, those are the things that really feed our ability to be compassionate to others. And if we don't nurture those and we don't pay attention to those, there's a real danger that our river runs dry. This is actually a bit of a cheat. This is the Loire last summer. It's not the Rhone, which didn't run dry, but you might recall there was a lot of concern about drought. And of course, this picture makes me think about another area of compassion, which I'm not even going to touch on, but the compassion that we show to our planet and our environment and our ecosystems. So it's really important that we keep our flow of compassion going by nurturing those different elements of it. So I want to tell you a story, and I'll be brief about it, and that's going to lead us into our first breakout session. So last year, at the beginning of January in 2022, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was an absolute shock. It came, I sometimes say it didn't really come out of the blue because I just had COVID over Christmas and I've been quite poorly with it. And I then got this diagnosis and I needed to have surgery. And I was quite frightened about having surgery. I'd never had surgery as an adult. I was having surgery because it wasn't elective. It was within the time frame. So normally if you've had COVID, they say, oh, you can't have surgery for 6 weeks. And I was 3 or 4 weeks after COVID. So that made me scared. I'd also done quite a lot of work on theatres and safety and never events. So I'm lucky enough to work right across our organisation. And I work with a consultant and anaesthetist colleague. So I knew quite a lot about, I knew an unhelpful amount about what could go wrong in theatres. So I was really scared. And then to add insult to injury in a fairly trivial way, but nonetheless it mattered to me at the time, the surgery was set for my birthday. So here I am on January the 21st, 2022, my beautiful support stockings that you can see there on the left-hand side. I was absolutely delighted when the junior doctor came and drew with what essentially looked to me like a Sharpie, a nice big black arrow pointing to the right side. That made me feel immensely reassured. And on the far right-hand side, you can just see the meal that I had when I came round, which is so far off my usual fare. I'm a bit of a herbal tea and brown bread kind of a girl. But oh my goodness, it tasted so good, I can't tell you. So that was the scenario, January 21st. So going back to the support stockings picture, there I am, I'm waiting for my surgery and a nurse comes in to clerk me in. And she says, she says, I just need to go through this form. She has a clipboard, she has a pen. And she says, name, I say, Benna Waites. She says, date of birth. I say, January the 21/1/69, 53 today, yay. And she says, address. So I just want you to think for a moment about what might have got in the way there. There are far worse things, my goodness, there are far worse things that happen in our hospitals, but there was something about that interaction that spoke to me about part of what the problem is around the loss of that human connection. Yeah, we can see, can't we? It wouldn't have taken her any more time. It wouldn't have, but somehow she couldn't even see it. So I'm going to ask you to work in threes. This is just a quick, short breakout. I want you to have a short discussion about what you think got in the way. Please feel free to pull in things from your own experience and other. So this is my story in a way is just a kind of foundation for that discussion. So use it to go where you would like to go in relation to what gets in the way of humanity and human responses in big organizations. So I'd like you to try and allow roughly equal airtime. Really useful to have a mobile phone to hand. So if there's 3 of you active in your breakout space, allow roughly 1 minute each, and then you'll have a couple of minutes just to pull it together at the end, and we'll bring you back in after 5 minutes. So does that feel reasonably clear? Rob, do I need to unscreen share in order to make this work, or can you send people out?
I think I can do that without you doing that.
Yeah, lovely. That's great. Okay. So I hope it's useful discussion, and I'll be asking for your thoughts when you come back in, just to pop in the chat, and I'll be sharing with you some of my thoughts about what the obstacles to compassion might be. So, Rob, Zooms are, work your magic.
So I think we said 5 minutes, didn't we, Benna? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yep. And for those of you that are back, actually, you might want to start writing in the chat around what might have emerged from your discussion. So what might have got in the way. So feel free to pop that in there. Do we have everyone now, Rob?
I think we do, yeah.
Great, that's lovely. Okay. So while you're just recording your thoughts about what might have got in the way, I'm going to do a gallop through some of the obstacles to compassion. And this is something we could spend a very long time talking about, but just to kind of flag. So I guess the biggest one is time. And I think most importantly, the perception that you don't have time. So interestingly, I think in the case I've just described to you from my experience, there would have been no additional time actually in pausing for just a moment, or it would have been seconds, wouldn't it? So it's something about the belief that you don't have time that somehow clamps down. And there's a very interesting study called the Good Samaritan study that talks about people training for the priesthood who are, and there's a beautiful irony in this study. So there are 3 conditions of trainee priests who are asked to go from one building to another, and they're heading over there in order to give a talk on the Good Samaritan. And of course, we all know the parable of the Good Samaritan. Compassion is absolutely at the heart of it. They on the way between one building and the other, they pass somebody, a stooge, an actor who is in distress, lying on the ground and groaning. And the 3 time conditions are: can you head over to the other building to give your talk? If you leave now, you should get there with enough time. Another one, which is a bit more time pressured, saying, "Oh, you really need to if you rush, you'll get there, but do get moving quickly." And then the third compassion is, "Oh goodness, the time it started 10 minutes ago, so you're already late." And essentially, there was a perfect correlation, as you might expect, between the people that stopped en route to help the person groaning and the amount of time they felt they had. So we know that time is huge, and that's a real problem for us in the public sector, isn't it? Or in the vast majority of the public sector, certainly the bits I have contact with. Leadership and team, climate and culture, I'll put those 2 together. We know that, and I'll come on to say more about this, but the experience you have as a member of staff and the way that you're spoken to and the way that you're treated and the way that you're taken care of will have an impact on what you're able to give to the people that you're taking care of. So those things are really relevant. People might be familiar with the work of Isabel Menzies. It's quite old now, but it was a really important sort of seminal paper around institutional practices as a way of defending really against overwhelm. So I was talking to a nurse about this thing that happened to me, and she was saying, you know, you would have been the breast in room 3, you know. You would have lost your humanity, you know, because actually it's too much, it's too overwhelming to care for people. They're you know, you sort of objectify another to some extent. There's lots of stuff about in-group, out-group dynamics. I'm not going to talk about the work of Philip Zimbardo now, but that's a name to Google if you're interested. And there was some really interesting work. So Zimbardo and Milgram were around in the heyday of social psychology research, which I learned all about in my undergraduate degree in the late 80s. So they were kind of working through the sort of 50s, 60s, and trying to understand some of the system conditions that cause us to behave in ways that we might think ahead of time in a kind of calm place, oh, I would never do that. And similarly, the bystander effect. So that sense of, you know, when nobody is intervening or helping or behaving in a particularly compassionate way, then it makes it less likely that you will too. So that sense that the way that norms get developed in cultures. So I'm really interested to hear some of your thoughts. So I don't know, Rob, if you're able to summarize those for me, any kind of just in a minute or so. Just I'm having a little flick through, but tell me what you've noticed in the chat.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Well, the things I did pick up were things that you kind of mentioned as well as you were talking. Then there was a bit around, you know, people being busy. There was some comments around burnout and moral injury. There was a bit around staffing and the resources, also the pandemic and the kind of pressures that brought. And I think someone mentioned masking as well as being a barrier to communication within certain settings. Also strong habits of just keep on doing or keep doing it, and yeah, normal for perhaps that person in terms of the procedure,
Yeah.
not so much for the patient.
Yeah, lovely.
So
Thank you. Yeah, and really rich, actually, lovely, rich thoughts in there. So thank you for feeding back your discussion in that way. That's really helpful. And lots of, you know, some of those kind of rushing, accidental, not hearing, you know, there might be lots of that. And also some of the systematic things that might happen that get in the way of humanity in healthcare. So in terms of, oh, do you know, annoyingly, my screen has stopped moving on, which is very frustrating. That happened just now. It sometimes seems to jam. So just bear with me. There we are. So what we also know is threat gets in the way, and there are lots of threats in a work context. So lots of threats that come from a fear of not being good enough, a fear of being socially excluded, a fear of fear of failing. There are so many threats to our social selves in work, and of course a social threat is particularly potent. We evolved to be social beings, and that means that our survival really was dependent on our membership of the tribe. So social threat is particularly, we respond to it as if it's a survival threat. You might be familiar with this model that Paul Gilbert developed. So up in the blue area here, we have the kind of drive state. So these are kind of 3 states that are clearly identifiable from our, you know, the hormones that are flying around our body, our brain activity. So we've got a drive state in the blue section. We've got threat down at the bottom here in the red, and we've got affiliation here in the green section. So these are the functions you can see in each circle, the functions that are associated with each one. And the problem is that compassion and that flow of compassion that we talked about is far more likely to flow when we're in the green state. And the problem is that that work very often has us pinging between blue and red. So I know when I open my inbox at work, you know, often I'll be in a kind of get things done sort of drive sense of, you know, that's my state of mind. And then I move into threat when something comes up that I'm concerned about or I'm worried about, or maybe that I haven't done. So I kind of ping between those two. So the challenge, I think, for us is how we can systematically grow safety. And of course, there's a huge area of psychological safety that I'm not going to talk about this evening. I'm actually doing a PhD in that area. So that's kind of related to compassion. But certainly feeling safe helps us to enter that zone of affiliation. So we're going to do a short visualization now. And I'm going to start with a bit of grounding. So I know you normally start your meetings in Mindfulness Cymru with a mindfulness practice. And in this company of full of people who know lots about mindfulness, it's been a part of my professional practice for a long time, but I still notice a little bit of, I hope my practice will be good enough, but let's have a go. So if you want to lower your eyes, or close them, and put both feet on the floor and make sure that you're sitting comfortably. And just take a moment to notice your breath. And notice the chair supporting your body. And notice the ground underneath your feet and your connection with it, your connection with the earth that we all have our feet on. And you might want to allow your breath to deepen a little. And to slow down. So I'd like you to imagine for a moment a time in the future when you might be ill, sick, unwell, vulnerable, in need of care. And so as you imagine that, you might be in a bed, you might be in a chair next to a bed, but wherever you place yourself, you're in a room and there's a door, and the door opens and a caregiver enters. It's someone that you haven't met before, but you're definitely feeling in a place of need. And as they come in, you look at them and there's something about them that makes you think, I'm going to be all right with this one. This one will see me right. I will get what I need from this person. I'd like you to try to imagine, you try and distill the one word or short phrase that might sum up the confidence that you have about getting what you need from that person. So a single word or a short phrase. And I'm going to invite you back into the room. I've unshared my screen. What I'm going to ask you to do, if it's okay, is put up your hands if you're willing to. I was saying to the team earlier, I last did this exercise in a live room, and what we did was everybody stood up And then as people said their words, you sat down if you heard your words. So I'm wondering if we can recreate that in this virtual space by everybody putting up their hands. And as you hear your word, putting your hand down. So let's try that. It means that I will come to you if you've got your camera on and your hand up. How about that? So if everyone puts their hands up, even people with their cameras off. But if you've got your camera on, I'll assume that you're happy to share your word. So hands up. If people are less familiar with Zoom, there's a reactions button. On my screen, it's at the bottom. So if you click on the reactions button, you should, there's a raise hand function. Okay, that's lovely. So lots of hands, that's fabulous. Now, you're at the top of my screen, Stephen, with your hand up and your camera on and beautiful bluebells behind you. Would you like to share your word or short phrase? Oh, but you need to come off mute first.
For me, is trust.
Lovely. Trust. That's great. Thank you. Matt Jones, hello. I'm going to come to you next. What's your word?
Yeah, mine was just smiling, as just an expression, open expression, smiling.
Thank you. Kath Mercer.
Confidence.
Lovely. Thank you. Now, Liz.
Warmth.
Lovely. Thank you. Julia.
They care about me.
Lovely. Thank you. Rob.
I was connection or connecting.
Thank you. Now we've got a couple of other people. Kath, I think I've come to you. So you might want to put your hand down. Martina, if you don't want me to come to you, you can put your word in the chat if you like, but I think you're the only person left that hasn't had their word captured. So I think what that shows us is how we would like it to be, where we'd like things to be coming from. So we would like these qualities to be reliably and consistently present. So that's what compassion looks and feels like. And I hope in doing that visualization, there's been a little bit of embodying that feeling of what it might look and what it might look and feel like when we're on the receiving end of it. So that's what we'd like it to look like. So what do we know about the evidence around compassion? I said I'd say a bit about the evidence, so I'm going to fly through some slides. Why does it matter? There's this fantastic book, Compassionomics, written by 2 American doctors, and they've pulled together loads of evidence. But essentially, you can see down the right-hand side of the slide some fairly extraordinary outcomes for compassion conditions versus treatment as usual. So the compassion conditions are where staff have been cued into being more compassionate, holding on to their humanity, responding as human beings, but crucially not giving more time. So they were very careful in their analyses that staff were not to do it more slowly or to spend loads of time, but that they were to tune into the kind of human connection element of the work. So you can see 50% lower requirement for opiates, surviving in palliative care, surviving 30% longer. Can you imagine if this was a marketable drug, how much money would have been invested in making this kind of universally accessible? We've got lower pain ratings post-operatively, and actually, if you do brain scans to map that, the compassion group have 47% less pain in the pain centres in the brain. So it's not just people's self-report, It's how we're physically experiencing things. Diabetes, this is a really big one. We know how awful diabetes is for people and how much it costs the health service. So a 41% lower odds of complications. Wound healing, 17% quicker. Compassion conditions account for 65% of the variance in patient satisfaction, and there are 50% or more fewer referrals and readmissions, quicker recovery. So much to recommend it. The size of these effects is greater than the effects of aspirin in heart attacks and of statins in the 5-year risk of a cardiovascular event. And this is the point I made it at the beginning, but I'll just re-emphasize it. We believe often that compassion will take more time, but it doesn't have to. It can do, it absolutely can do, but it doesn't have to. So in a sense, if you are kind of robustly holding the space and the time and the availability that you have, it is possible to be compassionate within that. So we've established that compassion matters and has a significant impact on outcomes. So what is it that we think is likely to enable compassion to thrive, and what correlates with positive service user experience? And I've come to that because actually I was participating in somebody's PhD a few years ago. People are trying to get really good measures of compassionate care from a patient point of view, and we don't really have those yet, but this is quite a good proxy, I think. Positive service user experience, the odds are that they will have been on the receiving end of compassionate care, and obviously effective care and competent care, but I think this is quite a good proxy. So you can see here a whole bunch of evidence, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but essentially where this is leading us is that patient experience is strongly impacted by staff experience. Now, there's unquestionably a correlation, but I think in recent years, people have become clearer and clearer that this is a causative relationship between how staff are experiencing their work and how patients experience their care. And I suspect that would probably hold in other sectors also, although most of the research has been done in health. So that feels like a very important part of understanding that if we're trying to make sense of how we get good patient experiences and compassionate experiences, we need staff to be in a good place. There's a book by an Indian entrepreneur called Employee First, Customer Second. And that was all about him working out, at the end of the day, he's an entrepreneur, his business depended on happy, satisfied customers. And what he'd hit on was that actually the solution to getting happy customers was having happy staff. So all of this data feels really important. Staff experience is absolutely key. This is a quote from Andy Bradley, who was the person who more than anyone else developed compassion circles, which we later used in Aneurin Bevan to develop taking care, giving care rounds, and are the kind of underpinning of the Compassion Practices website, which I'm going to go on to talk about later in this talk. But his question really was, why do we hear so little about a lack of compassion for patients, but so little? Why do we hear about lack of compassion for patients, but so little about the people who serve them? So it brings us back to that system conditions issue. Lots of this thinking informed our wellbeing strategy. I don't want to go into this in depth, but I guess what I wanted to flag was that we thought it was really important, as well as having good quality individual reactive responses to wellbeing, to have proactive system responses. So, and kind of ways of being, just ways of doing things. So making sure that we hold regular Schwartz rounds, making sure people have access to compassion circles, taking care, giving care rounds, and whatever else, making sure there's good debriefing. That would be system reactive stuff. So various ways in which we like to think about how this feeds into taking care of people. So the compassion circle, and we're going to move into our next breakout fairly soon when I've just described some of this to you. So the compassion practices are a family of practices that are all related, all joined by some uniting kind of values and principles that underpin them. But the compassion circle was the original one, and the others have kind of been based on that and are essentially shorter forms or adapted forms of them. So a compassion circle is designed to address all three aspects of the compassion flow. And I'm hoping to give you a bit of an experience of some of that in this talk this evening. So you've already had the visualization, which we would do as part of a compassion circle. We're going to move on to having a conversation about self-care. So this is the self-to-self stuff. What can you do to take better care of yourself? We've talked a bit about the obstacles to compassion. If we were doing a full compassion circle, we'd be talking about the enablers of compassion. How can we embed compassion in this team or service and enable it to thrive? And then there are appreciations that run right the way through the process of doing a compassion circle. So that's essentially broadly the structure. So what I'd like to do is a little microcosm of a compassion circle for you. So once again, we're going to get you into groups of three, this time different groups of three. If we were in a room, I'd give you the instruction to do it with people that you don't know so well. So this is what I'd like you to do. Introduce yourselves briefly and each share something that's going well outside of work. So if you can do that really briefly, but be specific. It's really lovely to hear just a little tiny bit of what's going on in your world. And then each of you will have a turn to respond to the question, what can you do to take better care of yourself? So the two listeners, so if you're in a group of three with all three of you active, two listeners shouldn't interrupt other than to prompt. If somebody runs out of steam, you can say, and what else? What else can you do to take better care of yourself? And should listen with fascination and appreciation. It's a kind of Nancy Klein term, listening with fascination. So doing our best listening, which is harder virtually. We can't lean in the same way, but do your best to do that. So the speaker or thinker has 3 minutes to respond to the question, what can you do to take better care of yourself? And if you can, use the person's name as you ask the question. So Matt, what can you do to take better care of yourself? That's even better. So you'll do that 3 times. You'll work your way. So having gone round your circle, brief introduction, very briefly, something that's going well in your life outside of work. So do that. That will hopefully take not much more than a minute or so. Then you'll have 3 minutes each to talk to the question, what can you do to take better care of yourself? When you've finished, take it in turns to appreciate each person. So start with the person that was talking first. So the two listeners will offer an appreciation to that first person, then move on and appreciate the person that was talking second, and so on. So that's the bit that sometimes gets people confused. So you do all of your talking first, what can you do to take better care of yourself, 3 minutes each on that. And then you work your way around the circle offering appreciations. And two people, the two listeners, share the minute. So you've got about 30 seconds each to offer up your appreciative thoughts for the person that's just spoken. So I'm hoping that will feel reasonably clear for people. Any questions before we send you off into breakout rooms?
Sorry, can I just ask, in this context, what does appreciations mean, just to be sure I'm understanding?
Yes, that's a lovely question. Thank you so much for asking it. So you're appreciating, so the odds are, I'm assuming, I don't know how well connected this community is, but you may well be in a breakout room with somebody that you're not familiar with. That's what I'm anticipating. So you are appreciating what you've heard about their efforts to take care of themselves and what you learn about them through the process of just listening for 3 minutes. And I think you'll be surprised at how much emerges in that space, that you will find things. There are 3 S's to appreciation. Be sincere, be specific, and be succinct. So try to remember those 3 S's as you're engaging with your appreciation. But it's kind of, yeah, it's stuff that you're noticing in a warm, appreciative frame of mind, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question? Is that okay?
Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I think we're ready to go into the breakouts. Oh, yes, Ali, sorry.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. Are those 2 questions supposed to be linked, or are they entirely separate?
The 2 questions being?
Something that's going well in outside of work, and what can you do to take better care of yourself? Are you seeing those as linked or separate things?
No, they're separate, completely separate things. So the one thing going well, thank you, Ali, for clarifying that. The one thing going well outside of work is completely, it's on its own. It's just it can be anything, and it can be really small. If you're having a difficult time at the moment, you might find that actually all the rubbish stuff is coming to mind. It can be a really small thing that you've noticed, something that you might take for granted, but actually you're just feeling like you might want to express some gratitude for in that moment. So really small, really brief on that, and then you move into the inquiry around self-care.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, any other questions? Really useful to bottom these questions out now, and we're relying on you to keep the time. Yeah, Julia.
Just a quick, would you be able to just put a very brief version of this form in the chat, just in case we forget? And just
my only worry is, thank you, that's probably because quite a lot of instructions, isn't it? My only worry is I'm not sure you can access the chat when you're in breakout rooms. I have a feeling.
You can broadcast, Benna.
Yes, so I think we will try and broadcast. We'll do our best to broadcast. So if you know that your first bit is introduce yourselves and share one thing that's going well outside of work, then move into the next bit and we'll start broadcasting from there and roughly try and give you prompts at the 3 minutes, and we'll tell you when to start your appreciations. Is that okay? Thank you. Okay, lovely. Right, let's try going into breakout rooms then, Rob, if you can make that happen. That would be fab, and I'll get on the broadcasting function. Welcome back, everybody. I think our instructions to you might not have been entirely bang on, so please accept my apologies for that. I hope there was enough that enabled you to have the conversations that you needed to have. And I hope it was a good chance to connect with other people on the call. My own view, I'm involved in a lot of this work. My own opinion is you can't have too many conversations about self-care. It is a work in progress. It is ongoing. There are always challenges and things to be thinking about. And I think it's incredibly valuable being alongside people, hearing them in that process. So I hope that was useful for you. So I'm going to go back to my my slides. So that was a little taste of part of a compassion practice. So these practices, and I'll show you the website, some pages from the website in a moment, but in terms of who can facilitate the practices, if you wanted to run one in your team or community group, or just talking to somebody about volunteering, you know, can do it in all sorts of different contexts, but we've done lots of them in health where you know, we're well over 1,000 staff who've been reached by it now. In fact, I think I'm way out of date on that number, actually. I'm just thinking I should have double checked the most recent number. Anyway, we've done an awful lot. So who can facilitate? Staff that are keen and interested. It doesn't have to be psychologists or mental health staff. Ideally, it's really useful to have experienced a practice before doing one. And we've set up live practices on the website, which are free. You can just sign up and attend if you book them on Eventbrite. So you have an opportunity to experience a full hour-long practice if you want to. If you're in an organisation, public sector organisation, you think you want to get it going, it can be useful to have some sort of community of practice or steering group. But actually just, you know, a couple of like-minded colleagues that you can support, you know, get the support you need. Training can help to build confidence and skills, but we don't think it's essential. So this is what the website looks like if you go onto it, and that little lilac bar at the top about joining the mailing list is great, because that will tell you about practices that are coming up and keep you informed about our thinking and our development. We've had a core enabling group that's been meeting for about 9 months, that's just concluded, so there is some learning and various things from that. But I'm wondering, because we often have so this morning I was running a practice and there was somebody from Sussex, a couple of people actually from Wales, and someone from Sydney. So it's got global reach, and the aim really is to make the practices available for free so that anybody can use them. So this is what it looks like. If you scroll down, you get to the compassion circle section, so you can click and download the guidance, and there's quite detailed guidance notes for facilitating a circle. There's also something called 20-minute care space, so there's a briefer version. There's a 10-minute pause space, and then a 5-minute me space. So all of that guidance is available completely free wherever you are in the world, which is lovely. Yeah, we're really delighted. That was something that we set up. It was an aspiration in the pandemic to make these practices more widely available, and the community is growing and thriving. So I guess if we're just thinking about making the case for some of these practices, that idea that people, teams and organisations are more productive, more effective and innovative when they regularly take time out to reflect, learn and adapt. And I guess for us, compassion practices feel like that's one way of creating those spaces for teams that can be really productive. So in terms of some kind of closing thoughts really around how might we look after ourselves in work. So it feels really important that we have spaces where, now as a psychologist, it's easy for me to talk about supervision. That's a core part of our professional offer. We would have that available, but I guess for those of you that aren't in those contexts, thinking about safe spaces where you can let off steam, be upset, have a rant, be vulnerable, just making sure that those spaces are part of your support network. We all need them. We all need to be taken care of. Make sure that you allow the good to land. So there's a new book called The Power of Bad that talks about the way that we privilege and focus on and attend to all of the bad stuff that happens, and we don't really give a proportionate amount of headspace to the good things. Now, for some of you, you might have noticed when you were receiving appreciations that it felt a bit odd, that you could feel yourself kind of slightly not being comfortable with it landing. So notice that about yourself and try to allow the good stuff to properly land and for you to really digest it. I'm a big fan of Schwartz rounds. You can find out more about those at the Point of Care Foundation. I think there's something about the way that it models being able to care for each other around our vulnerabilities is really powerful, but I won't say more about it. Feel free to ask me a question if you want to know more, but this talk's not specifically about that. So compassion practices I've talked to you about, and I guess all of this really, if we're thinking about how we survive and how we take care of ourselves, there's something about the way that resilience is drawn from the spaces in between, beyond us as individuals, that feels so important. I often have a real, almost allergic reaction to the notion of resilience as this kind of individual endurance sport. There's something about thinking about how we draw resilience from yes, the way that we take care of ourselves, but also the conversations that we have from others and the compassion that flows towards us, and the conditions, you know, just the climate, the conditions, the culture in which we operate. So I guess some questions around how we might allow that other to self compassion in. So we've spent quite a bit of time talking about self to self, how we take care of ourselves. So just some questions really. Are we able to reach out when we struggle? Do we have spaces where we can be vulnerable? How strong are our networks? Are we lucky enough to be on the receiving end of love and warmth? And it may be that you're not able to answer yes to all of those questions, but just noticing that those things are all really important to our resilience. If you do find yourself struggling and beating yourself up for not being more resilient, if some of those things are not in place for you, that might be quite a big part of why you're struggling. So related questions really to that are, when we're used to being the strong, contained, together, balanced, sorted person, how do we make sure we get the help we need when we need it? I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm guessing that there are a number of people on this call that might share that experience. It's certainly something which I've had cause to ask myself in my life. Supervision is an interesting space, particularly if it's with somebody more powerful than us, which it often is, unless it's peer supervision. So it might hit the spot, and you know, I would always hope that that would be an effective space, but it can sometimes feel evaluative. So making sure that there are other spaces where you can do what you need to do if you're not always bringing the bits that make you feel most vulnerable into those spaces. Don't beat yourself up about seeking support outside of work. Sometimes that's the best place to get it. And always bear in mind the non-clinical staff. It feels like we often miss the kind of admin staff and the people that aren't at the point of care, and yet they kind of are at the point of care. They're at the end of a phone. You know, they're the person welcoming people in. Certainly my experience when I was ill was that admin staff made the most enormous difference to a positive or less positive experience. And I guess before I go to questions, I suppose I want to say in relation to my own care, I'm now fortunately very well recovered, and I was very lucky not to need chemo, which I think it makes it a longer, slower journey. But I was lucky enough to receive some spectacularly fantastic care that I felt enormously grateful for. So I suppose I just wanted to say, you know, it can be done. We see it out there, and you know, that's after a pandemic when everyone's under enormous pressure. So we know it can be done. But it's up to all of us to build the conditions to make it happen. So any questions? I'll stop sharing my screen so that I can see you. And I'm very happy for you to put, so relatively small groups, so if you want to put your hand up and ask, that's absolutely fine. If you'd prefer to put a question in the chat, you can do, that's absolutely fine. Oh, Stephen, you've got there right away. The compassion does not mean being nice. How does this not become bullying?
Sorry, can I just talk
please
around
do.
that?
Yeah.
So I was on another talk session thing, and thank you so much. Thank you, gratitude for coming and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you. I was on another talk, and this person said, compassion does not mean being nice. Some of the greatest compassionate people were very strict, very hard, and they came out of their intention to get the best out of people. But in a time when there's a lot of bullying going on, and it's in the news, and how do we guard, how do we judge or measure that what we're doing in terms of getting the best out of people is compassionate and not bullying? That's what I was trying to get at.
That's a lovely question, and a very meaty question, if I may say so. But I will do my best to get my teeth into it in a fairly concise way in the space that we've got left. So I think that's right, that compassion is not always about being nice. But I do think there's that quote, isn't there? I think it was Plato who said, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. So I think there is something about the curiosity that we bring, about what might be going on for somebody, and the quality of our interactions. I sometimes talk about robust compassion. So I think as a leader, for example, really important to have clarity around expectations of job roles. There will be times when staff are not able to perform to those roles. So there's something about the how you have those conversations with people where there is a performance issue. And so what worries me a little bit is that notion of, you hear managers sometimes say, oh, we hold people's feet close to the fire, and that's somehow a sort of badge of honor about how much the service outcomes matter to you. Now, holding people's feet close to fire is torture, isn't it? You know, that, and I feel like that's the space you get into. That's kind of the bullying that you're talking about. So I suppose for me, if we take a situation where you think there's a performance issue, it would be around how we have the conversations, what the tone of those conversations are, how we are curious about what might be going on for someone, how we can put in place things that might support somebody to be able to perform better. So I think it's okay to be, I think you can be compassionate and clear. But yeah, I think bullying, there's a whole load of behaviours that would be associated with bullying that I would see as being counter to compassion. So, you know, judgmental, critical, undermining, non-straightforward communication. Yeah, a whole load of things. So I don't know that I'm answering your question very well, Stephen, but I do think there's a distinction. I think you can be robustly compassionate, and I don't think that should be the same as bullying. I think they are distinct. Kirsty, thank you for that lovely question. So you're saying, I wonder how we manage when we have expectations of supports. I'm thinking about work. Do you mean expectations of supports that aren't met, Kirsty?
Yeah, I think something you said just then about robust compassion and that curiosity. I noticed how I have had times in my work, particularly, or, you know, with the people I'm closest to, which might be at work, at home. And if things feel hard, I feel easily let down. You know, in the past, I might have felt let down, or not, I want to use the word abandoned. It's a bit strong, isn't it? But, you know, like I want someone to be able to know that I'm struggling, and but I also know that sometimes other people are also struggling at the same time. So it gets back to where you started, really, when you were talking about that experience where the nurse just blanked your kind of, oh, it's my birthday sort of thing. But it's noticing. So, you know, how do we get the compassion when everybody's literally at the edge and they're just really, really worn out, or they haven't got that little bit extra. Everything's going into just kind of keeping it going. And I'm trying to get through it, but I've just caught myself thinking, goodness, I've had expectations of people recently, and I felt anger, or I felt kind of let down, and then it's all worked out in the end. You know, we kind of get through, and then all the compassion comes back in again.
Yeah. So these are really difficult times. I was having a conversation with someone else on the call, actually, in the breakout, and just hearing about some of the stuff that's going on in her health board in Wales, and you know, just what a immense struggle it is. So I think lots of people will be having that experience of people being up against it, and a bit like the people in the Good Samaritan study, you know, just failing to stop for the person in trouble. So I don't have any easy answers to that. I guess part of why I spend a lot of time talking and thinking about this stuff is that I think it really helps if we can just be clear that compassion is part of the solution and part of the way forward. So one of the things that frustrated me when I first started doing this work was an idea that somehow, if you wanted to get results, that you needed command and control leadership, that compassion didn't really have a place. So that sense that part of our work as leaders or as professionals or in our jobs is to be thinking about compassion, not just for the people that we're serving, but for each other and for the staff that we're responsible for. So I suppose I wouldn't pretend that that's an easy way forward, but I think there are a number of things where if we just define what the work is, that's a good first step. It's a good first step towards making those things happen. So yeah, I don't know if that helps at all, Kirsty, but that's my best answer at this point.
I think it does. It's sort of definitely, it's just the ebb and flow, isn't it? That it's not a continuum. And sometimes it's almost with the absence, you think, oh, yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kate, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much. I wondered if you had any thoughts around students who are studying to become healthcare professionals, because they tend to be drawn to the professions with an initial sense of compassion. And so it's really thinking about how we support them during their training to sustain that compassion and integrate it into their practices. Yes,
that's a great question. And there's something quite painful, isn't there, about, you know, almost that sense that is it inevitable that they'll lose that, or that they'll be seen as naive, or, you know, is compassion somehow kind of caught up with that? So I suppose I would say nurture and appreciate that in them. We have done some work in the past. I'm not sure if it's happening currently, but we were doing taking caregiving care rounds as part of student nurse induction in our health board, and I loved, you know, that sense of the visualization, that feeling of kind of this is what we want it to feel like. These are the conditions we want to have reliably present. So I think some of the work that I've talked about this evening can help with that, but I think an appreciation is a really important technique, isn't it? You're naming something, you're being specific about something that you say, this is a real strength of yours. You know, you have huge compassion, and that strength might not be appreciated in this particular setting or on this particular ward, but I, as your supervisor or you know, whatever role you might have, I want to be really clear that that's a strength, and that there will be places where that can be, you know, where that will really contribute to the quality of the care that we're able to provide. Julia, should we try and, it is 8:30, but should we try and squeeze in one more question as your hand's up?
It was maybe a little similar, I think. My observation is people that I admire that are compassionate and can sustain that compassion in busy settings, they have quite an interesting skill set, I think, of being able to hold boundaries well, with confidence, but without, you know, ill will, essentially. And, you know, it feels to me that's quite a lot of skill to learn. I mean, I feel like I'm still learning in my life, you know, and particularly I think as a student, I would have really liked to have looked at that, because it was often in the 90s back along, but it was, you know, the compassionate way of being with people versus that you just get things done and you have to toughen up. But so it's like, you know, as someone who can easily want to, well, maybe not so much now, but you know, likes to listen and follow a patient's own energy and story and pace, but with system resources, meaning that I have to control that situation to a degree. It's like learning the skills to do that so that you're not losing your compassion as you do that. So I'm interested if that is part of your work, and if there are resources and skills that have been defined in a way to learn how to do that.
Yeah, that's a great, I love the way you've articulated that dilemma, Julia, because I think that's probably a frequently held challenge. And but but I don't know if there are resources that can help you do that. I think articulating the dilemma as well as you just have done is really helpful. It relates a bit, doesn't it, to the robust compassion stuff that we were talking about before. So you can be firm, you can be clear, you know, holding time boundaries. Interestingly, when we run compassion practices, there is we encourage really robust facilitation around compassion practices. So for example, you would sit in a circle, whether that's virtual or live in the room, and you would take it in turns. And actually, if somebody speaks out of turn as a facilitator, you hold a boundary around that. So you're really clear that it's turn taking and that people don't get to jump in. It's not a free-for-all discussion. It's a very clear methodology, if you like. So in a funny sort of way, compassion practices are probably quite a good practice for that kind of holding boundaries and space, because they're such a structured practice. The other thing that pinged as you were talking, I'm not entirely sure it's an answer to your question, but I wonder if it might be helpful. So part of what I noticed back in 2013, when I first started getting really excited about this stuff, was this sense that people were seeing compassion as a nice, soft, fluffy thing that was a kind of optional extra, kind of nice to have if you, you know, if you had time, but actually when the chips were down, you just needed to crack on. And what's been so beautiful is the way that, I mean, it's another confluence. Actually, I showed you a picture of a confluence of two rivers, but that sense that if you're interested in performance, or if you're interested in what it feels like to be in work and to do the right thing and to kind of be lovely to your staff, actually you do the same thing. So if you are a finance person, and I don't want to knock finance people, there are lots of highly compassionate finance people, but you know, if you're a finance person with your eye on the bottom line, compassion should be just as important to you as it is to, you know, a therapist, let's say. So because all of that ends up, all of the data we have says that's what gets results, that's what gets your organization performing. So I think that's a bit tangential to what you were saying, but your thoughts just reminded me of it a little bit in terms of kind of making the case. I'm really mindful of time, Rob, and sorry I've gone on a bit long, but I think we've done everybody's questions now, which is good. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much for your participation and your questions.
Thanks, Benna. Yeah, I was sat here with my robust compassion and my boundaries and thinking, but I know we've used the word gratitude and appreciation, I think, just in the last few minutes, and so I just wanted to express that my gratitude and appreciation for you coming along and doing this evening, and yes, very much appreciated. Just a reminder at the end that we're doing the inquiry next week. Everybody that signed up for the event today will get an email with a link to the video that we've made today, and also the link to the event for next Wednesday at the same time. We'll talk a bit more, because it did seem just at the end then we could have probably gone on for a bit longer, couldn't we? And there was a bit of pace gathering, I think, and kind of curiosity about what you talked about. So just exploring that next week would be very nice if people can get along. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say, Liz, just to end, or you okay? I don't want to surprise you.
Well, no, just a thank you, and how much I've enjoyed being part of this, each of the discussions that I've been part of there, and just to encourage people just to be part. You know, this is something we can do together, isn't it? We've, you know, that actually getting back together to network, keep in touch. You know, if you keep in touch with Mindfulness Wales, we can pass on to whoever. We'd love some feedback I know Benna would like some feedback, so I'll be asking you when I send the email out if you've got any feedback about how this has landed. But how do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time. And if all of us are taking some steps and taking a bite out of that elephant, you know what, then maybe we can actually make a difference in terms of some of the big organizations that seem impermeable at the moment. Just thank you so much, Benna. I feel really hopeful. And thank you everyone for participating. Good team here. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.